Welcome to the Clearcut book launch. Clearcut is Political Economies of Deforestation, which is a new open access book by Markus Kröger. We are super excited today to be joined both by Markus, and we also have a wonderful discussant here, Larry Lohmann. My name is Sophia Hagelani Albov, and I am going to be assisting today by running the logistical parts of this seminar, and I will also be facilitating the question and answer. I'd like to remind all our participants that you are welcome to write questions at any time, either during Larry's comments or Markus's presentation in the chat. And then when we open into our question and answer, we can either read those questions from the chat, or you can raise your hand to ask a question or make a comment with your voice. So today, this book launch is co-organized by the Trees for Development Project, which is the project that Markus and I both work in. Markus is the PI of that project, and it is also hosted by the Global Extractivisms and Alternatives Initiative, which is a research initiative that was born out of the Faculty of Social Science at University of Helsinki, looking at extractivisms and transformative alternatives. As mentioned, today we are joined by both our book author, Markus, and our discussant, Larry Lohmann. We are going to start the we're going to start the proceedings today with comments from Larry about the book Clearcut, and then Markus is going to respond to those comments and also give us some of his insights into the work that he did putting Clearcut together. I'm going to give a quick introduction for anybody who isn't completely aware of who both our speakers are today, and then I will turn the floor over to our first speaker. So first, our author, Markus Kröger, is a professor of global development studies at the University of Helsinki. His work focuses on the interface of critical, agrarian, and environmental studies, especially on the global politics of extraction amid climatic-ecological crises. Besides the globalization and conflicts of forestry extractivism, he's also studied mining, agriculture, and agroforestry dynamics in South America, India, and the Arctic. He's published many books, and including the one that we're going to be hearing about today, which is his most recent book. In his work on he's always been pushing the bounds of conventional resource. Oh my gosh, excuse me, of conventional research on resource frontiers. So that's our author. And then Larry Lohmann, who is going to be our discussant, is with the Corner House UK, and he chairs the advisory board of the World Rainforest Movement and has worked with social movements in Thailand, Ecuador, and many other countries. His work confronts issues of plantations, forests, carbon markets, energy, artificial intelligence, and neoliberalism. He's had articles that have appeared in academic journals in political economy, environment, geography, accounting, Asian studies, law, science studies, socialism, anthropology, development, and literary criticism. So we have a very inter and multidisciplinary set of speakers with us today. So that is who we're going to be hearing from. Without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to Larry for his comments. And then after Larry is done, like I said, we'll have a presentation from Markus, and then we'll open up for open questions and answers with you, our participants. So Larry, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Sophia, and thanks both to Sophia and Markus for inviting me to participate in this event. As soon as Markus sent me this book, I immediately started skimming it and was very struck and very inspired with what I saw. In my experience, the most useful academic books are those that come alive in your hands, not just because of the new discoveries they recount, the innovations they make, the quality of the research, and all of that, but more because of the changes they generate in you while you read them and the inspiration they give you to go on with your struggles, but in a different and maybe better way. This is what Markus's new book, Clearcut, does for me. It helps me remember tools that I sometimes forget I have for thinking about what causes deforestation. It gives me fresh confidence to push forward on many neglected issues and look for serious new pathways where people can join together to confront the forest crisis. We live in an age that is awash in extremely simple minded official theories about deforestation. In reality, these theories tend to be little more than rudimentary, abstract fictions thrown up by powerful institutions in their own interests. These fictions don't usually waste any time describing the realities of forests themselves. In fact, they're usually formulated by people who haven't spent much time with people who live in forests, or with people who are present on the ground when the trees are cut down, or with people who cut the trees themselves, or people who hang around afterwards. But careful analysis is not the function of these theories anyway. Their function is more to help big interests navigate the political turbulence of a global forest crisis in a style that points to themselves as a solution to it rather than one of its causes. Because any proposed solution, of course, needs a problem. Things being what they are, that problem usually turns out to be some racial or class group other than my own. This is not a conspiracy, it's merely a barely conscious reflex to move along the path of least intellectual resistance in a world of racism and colonialism. Bit by bit, a whole political economy of ignorance about deforestation is created, as it were by default. A crazy kind of received wisdom about forests becomes entrenched that, to adapt the words of the late James Ferguson, is not just false, but outlandish. Back in the 1980s, we all listened to Margaret Thatcher going on about so called slash and burn agriculture, with all the racism that that implied. Almost since time immemorial, it sometimes seems, we've had to listen to people who call themselves scientists rant about overpopulation, which is always the overpopulation of other people, as the primary cause of deforestation as well as every other environmental crisis. Since the late 1960s, too, we have listened to countless orthodox economists tell us that the cause of deforestation is incorrect prices. They tell us that as soon as a hypothetical, all powerful, benevolent authorities bestow the correct monetary value on standing forests, cash will flow into the forests and magically solve the problem. Market failures will turn into market successes. Once all mispricings are wiped out, the perpetual motion machine of market exchange will create a circular economy and preserve forests forever. Of course, this simple-minded theory ignores the history of commodification, enclosure, entropy, and state power, as well as the function of prices in appropriating economic surplus in the first place. But it helpfully points away from economists' own co-responsibility for sustaining and deepening the forest crisis. Naturally, that makes it very popular at the World Bank and in many university departments. The flavor of the month in this particular political economy of ignorance is the fanciful proposal called the TFFF, or Tropical Forests Forever Facility, which was officially unveiled at the Climate Summit in Belém, Brazil last month. The TFFF is a new scheme for leveraging taxpayers' money to make profits for Wall Street from the international emerging economy debt market, and then siphon off some of these profits to pay relatively small money prizes to national governments in the global south who pass a paternalistic test for halting deforestation administered by the World Bank. In order to function, this institutional setup requires a particularly simple-minded theory of deforestation. According to this theory, deforestation is, again, a result of inadequate economic valuation of conservation, combined with a lack of money in central government treasuries, what certain fabulists like to call the funding gap. A necessary condition for this assertion is that individual Southern governments be theorized as being not only independent parties who bear the key responsibility for the destruction of forests that happen to lie within their geographic borders, but also all-powerful actors when it comes to stopping it once they are promised a little cash. Notice how smoothly this theory, if you want to call it that, diverts attention away from what Markus calls a system of interstate competition, extractivism, and speculation, replete with colonialist armed violence applied to commodity frontiers, including mineral, cattle ranching, plantation, hydropower, oil, and carbon sink frontiers. The result is not only to dismiss existing knowledge of the real causes of deforestation, but also to inhibit further inquiry into the subject. In fact, now that I mention it, one of the worst things about all the simple minded theories of deforestation that I've mentioned, or perhaps I should say self interested racist fantasies, is the deadening effect that they can have on serious scientific research. As Markus puts it, trying to find the silver bullet of how best to avoid deforestation, paradoxically, might yield fewer results about the actual problematic processes that do cause deforestation. You can improve your remote sensing and satellite monitoring of forest changes as much as you like. But if you have no viable theory of what is causing those changes, your interventions are likely to make things worse. Worse still, convenient yet simple-minded theories of deforestation can harden into the landscape itself certain features that deepen the crisis. Famously, this can happen when tragedy of the commons theorists who advocate more private property as the silver bullet solution to deforestation get their way. One result is often to undermine commons norms among small farmers themselves and to undo practices that had kept forests standing for centuries. By the way, let no one accuse me of an unthinking leftist bias here. We all know that simple-mindedness about the causes of deforestation is not a vice limited to reactionary institutions like the FAO or the UNFCCC or Yakopuri or the Nature Conservancy or WWF. For example, we're probably all acquainted with counterculture figures who recurrently fall back on the idea that the real root of deforestation is overconsumption, and that the solution will be to hold ethics classes for a lot of individuals in the global north. Let's not forget either well-intentioned NGOs who are forced by the exigencies of having to lobby at the UN to pretend to embrace, for the nonce, the theory that the way to deal with the forest crisis is just to provide southern states with more cash, or to reverse current unjust financial flows from southern to northern states. Not much less simplistic is the abstract claim, put forward by many on the left, that deforestation is caused by an underspecified global capitalism. Such a claim is fine as far as it goes, but it's like me holding up a card reading Accumulation Crisis or Death Throes of the Latest Global Empire whenever anybody asks me about how to confront Trumpismo. It sort of functions to get me off the hook of responding to the question, but it isn't much help to movements needing to discuss and identify strategic points for the struggle for liberation. By the same token, as Markus points out, it's not going to help much in understanding, say, the wildly oscillating trends in Brazilian deforestation over the past 20 years, just to invoke global financial capitalism, without dedicated analysis of what Markus calls the sublogics of specific sectors, for example, the soybean corn complex, the relevant territorially vested interests, or the sunk costs that apply in this particular case. In fact, it's probably fair to say that it's the very premise of Markus's book that the job of responsible academics should be to refuse the temptations of all such oversimplifications about the underlying causes of global deforestation. The book itself is grounded in painstakingly assembled insights about specific, far-flung forests in Brazil, Finland, Peru, and other countries, pointing out the differing dynamics of deforestation in each case, It insists, for example, on taking seriously the question of why, when you cross the Brazil-Peru border, you see such big differences in the nature and extent of deforestation in what you might reasonably expect to be the same landscape. And the question of why industrial plantation politics, and just as important, industrial plantation resistance, is so different between Brazil and, say, Indonesia. Yet this attention to the detail of specific cases encourages not an abandonment of theory, but the reverse. Taking his cue from, among other ideas, the pioneering sociologist Phil McMichael's model of incorporated comparison, Markus refuses to abstract his cases from their location in historical time and space, understanding them as related but differing nodes in a singular phenomenon that is constantly emerging historically and that can be the subject of useful generalizations. One of these historically grounded generalizations is the notion of regionally dominant political economies, or RDPEs, about which I hope Markus can say a lot more today. As Markus expresses it, singling out RDPEs as key drivers of deforestation challenges prior notions on nation-state centrality, such as those we see in the Tropical Forest Forever facility. Instead, it focuses on diverse, politically powerful extractivist sectors that both cause and rely on deforestation against the background of the dynamics of the current international system, widespread state capture, and capital's perennial need to seek and produce what Jason W. Moore calls cheap natures. Once that an RDPE is established, Markus writes, ecological interests become secondary in the definition of territories to the interests of the wide variety of actors that benefit from the further expansion of the sector. These might include machinery dealers, rentiers, traders in legal or illegal gold, land speculators, as well as innumerable others. In taking this approach, Markus aligns himself with fellow theorists such as Wendy Wolford, who notes that the boundary of the nation state was not the national border. Rather, the boundary was the commodity frontier that nations laid claim to and protected with an ever more elaborate set of rules. He also associates himself with recent intellectual currents that question the fashionable notion of the Anthropocene. Instead, he invokes opposed concepts like Moore's Capitalocene or the Plantationocene, loosely associated with writers like Walford, Donna Haraway, Anna Tsing, Sylvia Warner, Tanya Lee, Elizabeth McKittrick, and Sophie Chow. One of the virtues of Markus's RDPE theory is that, unlike the simple-minded theories of orthodox economists that I mentioned above, it takes seriously not only the issue of space, but also the issue of time, as it's bodied forth in particular territories. Establishing an RDPE takes time, leaving a cascade of opportunities for opposition. Yet by the same token, once an RDPE is in place, sunk costs, such as technologies of extraction, logistical networks, social channels, investment and debt arrangements, as well as accrued social, symbolic, and physical capital, have already become entrenched in the habitus, in the identities, ideologies, feelings, thoughts, and attitudes of the territory in ways that it takes time to disrupt. This path dependence cuts sharply against the image of flipping imaginary price switches that is so common in economics departments and mainstream conservation organizations, an image that gives the mistaken impression that we don't have time to study history and should just get on with preventing deforestation as quickly as possible. However, like your typical commentator, I'm now going to be completely unfair and neglect most of the rest of the fascinating treatment of RDPEs in Markus's book. Instead, I'm going to zero in on just one dimension of the RDPE discussion that particularly struck a chord with me. This is precisely those aspects of territorial habitus, identity, feelings, thoughts, and attitudes that I just referred to. Of particular interest to me was Markus's description of the ways that in different regions and different RDPEs, different moral economies not only become dominant among elites, but also establish themselves among small communities and in the land itself. This concept of moral economy of course, comes from the British social historian E.P. Thompson and has been developed by writers analyzing other regions, including late James E. Scott. Regional moral economies include local values, stories, feelings, mentalities, customs, mythologies, psychological identifications, understanding as of how responsibility should be distributed, ways that ordinary people structure and make sense of the world in their minds. For Markus, transformations in these regional moral economies are crucial when it comes to understanding where the thrust of deforesting extractivism is going to be allowed or resisted. Extrapolating from Thompson a bit in the direction of Jacques Lacan and Slavoj Žižek, I myself would say that regional moral economies also include distinctive regional fantasies, although neither Markus nor Thompson used that particular word. The idea is that, for example, in Brazil, a cowboy mentality can over time become popular not only among big ranchers, but even among relatively powerless people. In Finland, a narrative that says that clear cuts and bog trenching are best for us and our land becomes popular not only among big paper and biomass industrialists, but also among small forest landholders, in spite of what Markus identifies as its various irrationalities. Meanwhile, a minor imaginary might well become dominant at the grassroots in a country like Peru, or at least seem to become dominant to observers in certain contexts. And popular community stories and attitudes about industrial plantations might differ between Indonesia and Brazil, just because so many more people are employed on plantations in Indonesia. Unsurprisingly, a lot of these mythologies, fantasies, and self-images have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies to some extent, coming to permeate the socio-natural landscape itself, often with destructive results. But we also shouldn't forget E.P. Thompson's original point, that a different sort of moral economy can exert power before and during the onslaught of enclosing or extractivist forces. Let me bring a couple of my own examples to the party. A couple of years ago, in an indigenous territory that I will not name, some shady digital businessmen arrived with a contract that promised riches for the local people if they would sign up to a scheme by which the conservation of their forest diversity assets could be marketed to northern investors. The only condition for this project was that the community had to consent to real-time digital and satellite surveillance of every aspect of their local biome, with all data centralized and processed by the businessman's company itself. The businessmen assured the community that nobody would ever try to steal the land or the forest itself, nor interfere in any way in community stewardship. Nevertheless, after many months of toing and froing and lots of intra-community conflict, the indigenous nationality finally rejected the scheme. One reason was that the community felt that it was indeed a form of land grab, because in their view, to take information or knowledge about the forest could not be distinguished from ripping off the forest and the community itself. The community's thoroughly non-Cartesian moral economy thus provided a foundation for its defense against the encroaching swindlers, and very likely has helped them to preserve their forests. The other example is a sort of cazador or hunter moral economy, which several forest activists, including indigenous activists, tell me can be quite strong among certain indigenous communities. This mentality might be expressed as something like, hey, let's go hunting for the cash brought by these foolish whites who are offering us all these silly paper contracts for REDD Plus or for TFFF or for digital carbon or biodiversity investments or whatever. And then we can capture that cash and bring it back to our forest communities with no further consequences. You might feel a lot of sympathy for this particular mentality, and you might say, more power to these guys. Maybe this might turn out to be one more way of fighting deforestation. But of course, it's more complicated than that, as often emerges in international discussions among indigenous forest peoples themselves. Many participants in this debate point out that the confidence in community power expressed by this particular local narrative may be misplaced, and the ultimate results unfortunate when the narrative interacts with the fantasies of opponents of indigenous rights who are acting within emergent RDPEs centered on capital's exploitation of ecosystem services. Here I'm reminded of the work of Jeremy Campbell, a fellow researcher that Markus's book has pointed me to. Campbell describes how in Paraguay, rural colonists without much power, through their improvisatory use of narratives and fantasies about property, some of them borrowed from development officials or economists and adapted to varying temporary purposes, have actively participated in the construction of a regularized state tenure regime that, in Campbell's words, is in the end rigged for theft and destruction. In this connection, I think we might well want to try to sharpen or deepen Markus's treatment of this moral economy aspect of RDPEs. Markus relies a fair amount on Gramsci and a somewhat crude dichotomy between coercion on the one hand and ideological or cultural hegemony on the other. This picture has been greatly enriched recently by Soren Mao's brilliant rejuvenation of Marx's concept of mute compulsion, and also challenged by James C. Scott's previous work on domination, protected sites, and hidden transcripts. And when we talk about RDPE's role in deforestation, I reckon we need to include such perspectives. You might think that this last remark is a criticism of Markus's book, but I don't look at it that way. For me, it's simply among the many things that I needed the book to spur me to think more carefully about. The point is that when analyzing how deforestation is caused and curbed, forest activists need to consider as rigorously as possible these questions of how friends and enemies from different regions and social formations in flux can talk to and influence one another. We have to grapple every day with the fact that nobody's language is really or forever their own, or even temporarily separable from other languages in the vast, fast-evolving, diverse sea of forest cultures. Methodologies for working out a theory of global deforestation cannot avoid deploying what the great anti-imperialist scholar Sakai Naoki calls a heterolingual mode of address, one that seeks to engage with mixed as well as differing audiences, as opposed to a homolingual address, which is assumed to mediate separate cultural communities modeled as national in identity and treated as homogeneous. Well, that's quite enough introduction from me. I think it's now past time to start listening to the star of today's show, Markus Kröger. So, Markus, over to you.
Thank you so much, Larry, and for everybody to coming over here. So it was wonderful to hear that you made much of my talk unnecessary here by introducing the book so well. And yeah, it's a great privilege to have you here with your work already from the 90s and before that, centering on these topics. So yeah, actually, before starting to work more directly with this topic of deforestation, I worked more with the issue of tree plantation expansion, industrial tree plantations, paper and pulp industry globalization, where Larry with Ricardo Carrere, they were and are the leading experts with books like Pulping the South from the 90s and so on. So that kind of focus on different sectors, focusing on those different sectors has been really important for the theorizing in this book. So first I started with these studies, especially in this number 4 point on the expansion of eucalyptus plantations in southern Bahia and the Atlantic rainforest deforestation that industry has carried out, replacing the native forests with eucalyptus plantations for pulp production. And then after that, I have studied other regions causing deforestation. So looking at how different sectors have different roles. So for example, cattle, gold, soybeans, and so on. So this book focuses on the ranching kind of like cattle capitalism role, and then it has several chapters on gold and illegal economies, and then on also the industrial forestry in Finland. And in 2017, I traveled from Cusco by the recently paved road to Brazil, from Cusco, Peru. And here in the map, you can see on the purple, this highway, transatlantic highway, Trans-Pacific Highway. And it's clear from the map that, and visible that there's much less deforestation on the Peruvian side and Brazilian side. And I was perplexed by this, like, why is that? It's a similar region, it's the same road and so on. So then I understood that you have to look also at the impact of polity and region. How does that affect the issue? So here you can see a more detailed map of the Acre state in Brazil. And here is the Chico Mendes Extractive Reserve, where you see less deforestation. And this kind of thinking and field research there helps to think about this topic of who is responsible, because in many studies there's a focus on saying that the local people or peasants or those actually doing the logging, they are like the main culprits. It's kind of like a class-based injustice claim, and you don't really focus on the systemic features or the structural violence, the role of, for example, building that road. So there has been a close correlation between highways and then deforestation. But you see between this comparison that it doesn't really translate into such in Peru. You cannot say that it would alone explain these things. So there are multiple causal factors here. So in these regions next to the road, there's too much cattle. There are big ranchers, and the land is poor. So they are driving the cattle, the calves, into the extractive reserve and making illegal schemes with the locals, saying that you can get my cows there and then calves there to fatten, and then you will get money if I can deforest that area. And many locals agree to that. And this can be explained partly by these moral economic changes that Larry was also mentioning, because the locals, there has been during the Workers' Party government especially an expansion of the universal schooling as a poverty reduction developmental issue. And then people have to travel for several hours a day, like kids, to go to school from the forest, so they don't have time to learn the ways of how to live in the forest and for the forest and so on, from the forest, how to tap rubber and collect stuff. And then when they return from the home, from the schools and the cities, they have this cowboy mentality and want to cut down the trees and put the ranch there. So it works in parallel. You have both this pushing effect, but also the enabling factor. While in the side of Peru, you didn't really see that, because they have another regionally dominant political economic system, which is kind of deforesting extractivism, which is gold mining, which you can also see from the satellite. Here you can see that these are big ranches inside the extractive reserve, like 400 hectares, 400 cows. So the book has first it has this theory part on what I call these political economic systems that are territorialized, and then these moral economies, enabling and resisting causes. And first part of the book, it has 3 chapters. It looks at this ranching and grabbing Brazil. So actually, I initially started to study ranching as the key cause, because there's 160 million hectares of ranching land in Brazil. And at least 100 million hectares of that could easily be converted to agrarian reform or made much more productive. It has just 1 million cow per hectare. It's very badly used, but still they keep on expanding, and over 80–90% of the deforested area in the Amazon is actually an area for pasture, for it has grassland. But when you look at it more in depth, you can find out that there is a system that I call kind of like a land mafia in Brazil, where the government has regularly legalized the illegal land grabs. Also, Lula did this in 2009. The federal prosecutors, which are doing good work within the state, kind of like progressive state actors, they were trying to work to avoid that. But then there was a legalization, this Amazonia Legal program that legalized the prior land grabs. And so there's kind of like an expectation by these big land grabbers who come into an area they burn an area, cut down the major trees, put a fence, put the grass there, and then cows, that will be like legalized. They falsify the documents with the help of local cronies and federal politicians and so on. And in the de facto local economy then and politics, when you see a land like that, you know that it's kind of like somebody's marked land and you don't go to mess there. So this is something that is not generally so well known, even today, by journalists, also others who are writing on deforestation. But when I talk to ranchers, they mention that there's a saying in Brazil that a rancher or big rancher, lives poor to die rich, because the actual value of the cattle business is not so big. Although you have like a 2,000 herd cattle, then 2,000 hectares, you don't get so much money from that. But that kind of land, if it's like at the soybean frontier, doubles its value in 1 year easily. So 5 million euro ranch of like that can be 10 million euros in next year. So that's big money, and kind of explains why people engage in this speculative aspect of it. So you kind of wantonly deforest areas, just expecting that there would be a major development like a road building, or that the soybean frontier would come there, as it has done. It has rapidly expanded from like 20, 30 million hectares to now almost 50 million hectares in Brazil for soybeans. So this ranching and land grabbing and soybean expansion, they have to be studied together. Also, this soybean, although it has 50 million hectares and pasture has 160 million, it has much more power and money and so on. So then I studied also this gold mining in the Amazon, and it rapidly turned into a study of illegal economies. So there's been a merger between the kind of like criminal gangs like PCC and Comando Vermelho in Brazil, but also like ex-FARC people in Venezuela, ELN in Colombia, paramilitaries, and in Peru, local land mafias, powerful families, which are transporting, like part of those networks they are like merging with people who transport drugs. So they make kind of like a deal when you have a gold mine, an illegal small-scale coal mine in the Amazon. You always have typically like an airport piste somewhere nearby, and they kind of rent that site for transporting the drugs and arms and mercury and other contraband, and then washing the drug money with the gold, and also the illegal gold. You can wash that with the drug and so on. So there's like this kind of like surging of this kind of Mexican style illegal economy in the Amazon, and many parts of it have become like really out of bounds for the state, like the Yanomami region in northern Brazil. And there should be much more monitoring on that. So I did a lot of interviews with police of different levels and prosecutors and so on to understand that struggle and how it's expanding and what they're trying to do. So it's called this kind of like narco-carimbo. Carimbo is the gold mining in Portuguese, or narco-desmatamento, narco-deforestation. So that's a really rising theme that should be studied more in detail. And this is important because there are still many accounts that say that, the solution would be the regularization of gold mining, for example, in Peru or whatever, and the completely wrong picture is shown of that sector, which is not really sustainable. There's a lot of violences in there. And that kind of environmental impact of that is also very deep, because it's hard for forest to regrow in those open pit areas. And then there's another part looking at Finland and the pulping sector, how it's dominant there, hegemonic also. Like people had more fear to talk to me in many parts of Finland than in the Amazon, although they are facing like death and so on. So I figured out that maybe this is because they live in different socio-territorial areas. So they have that issue that Larry was mentioning, like these peasant indigenous communities, they are rooted still locally. They have that powerful local moral economy, and they face this attempt of domination, but they are not under the hegemony. They are not part of the same system, so they can more openly talk. While in Finland, it's difficult because people have typically neighbors who are engaged in clear cutting, or you might be afraid of losing your job and so on. So people want to retain anonymity. And it's kind of interesting because it's still like continuing, even though the industry does not have such importance anymore. It is important still, but not as it was decades ago. And then there's final parts that look at the issue from the international aspect, because you cannot blame the local hosts or parties or states, like Larry was pointing out, but it's like an international system problem. So you have an interstate system where the competition and rivalry is the key, and nation states kind of try to have some kind of like security, at least in theory, for their citizens by any means, which typically means garnering economic growth. And then forests have not really mattered in this picture. And what I also found out that typically when you have a global crisis like a pandemic or war, the prices of commodities really rise rapidly. And then that causes major deforestation increase, like during the COVID-19, the price of beef, lumber, gold really skyrocketed and led to further expansions and violence in these frontier regions where you had also much less policing because of the COVID. And the same is the issue with, for example, the American Civil War, with the opening of the Tar Frontier in Finland in 1860s, linked to that American Civil War, or the Korean War in 1950s with major push for increased deforestation in Finland while the Korean War and the high prices lasted. So people tried to cut fast, and that kind of like coincided with this banning of other than clear cutting practices in Finland, this war on Korea, and helped to install this kind of paper and pulp industry hegemony and dominance. So here you can see some picture of the cows in Brazil, and so on. So this kind of like theorizing is like saying that the regionally dominant natural resource sectors are the key explanatory factor in how, where, when, and if deforestation occurs. And I'm talking about deforesting extractivisms here. But I think this theory in this book, although the book is focused on the topic of deforestation and explaining it better than the current theories, for example, in economics can, I think it could be applied also in other sectors. Let's say, for example, the military industrial complex and the production of arms and its role in the US and Russia in some kind of geopolitics currently, instead of looking at the like kind of day-to-day diplomatic developments as you see in the news as kind of like the main issue to focus at when you look at more in depth what's behind there, like kind of following the money and the power. So yeah, it's kind of like challenging this Ricardian idea that capital could move freely from one place to another. That's not really the case, because you have vested interest, you have sunk costs, you have investments made. So, for example, some people have said that it might make much more sense for biofuel production to plant the soybean areas in Brazil with African palm oil palm plantations, like in Indonesia. But that will not happen because that's another sector with other kind of like interests and groups and companies and so on. So those companies that are there in the soybean kind of enclosed areas, they have grabbed that area and they will not allow other kind of sectors to come there. Capital does not move freely, It's global capitalism, or what we understand by it, is actually composed by these siloed sectors. So when you look at it disaggregated. So for example, in the soybean regions in Brazil, you have a really big dominance by these European and American and some Chinese agrotoxic companies like Bayer, which bought Monsanto. So most of the people engaged in soybean trade or production, they have this barter system where you pay for the agrotoxics or the pesticides by the sacks of soybean you produce. But when you agree to that, like part of your, first you pay little and then more sacks. And when you agree to that deal as a producer, what happens is that you kind of become dependent on the company, because then the company buyer, by the agreement, can define how many times and which amounts of agrotoxics, fertilizers, and others you have to use, and you buy also the soybean, genetically modified soybean from them, and the corn and so on. So you are kind of like trapped in that, and it's highly expensive. And for example, in this COP30 meeting in Belém, I participated there now and talked to people there. And they said that, typically you applied far too much. I mean, it's not good for the producers. And this was that actually like bigger producers, like 5,000 hectare soybean producers, complained to me that they are trapped also because of this international pressure by these European companies. So the European Union also, for example, allows the exportation of these agrotoxics that are banned in Europe to Brazil, and then they are like allowed there and used there, which are not really even needed. So they are like applying 20 times a year these pesticides, although like 10 times or less would be enough even in this kind of highly problematic production.
Markus, you've been speaking for 15 minutes.
Thank you. So there's some issues about the methodology that might be helpful. So it's like more like problem-driven research approach, transdisciplinary, using many methods, doing empirical observation and this kind of case study approach to develop theory. And I would say that the difference to these theories and studies on path dependency is that I don't focus on the national level so much in that kind of like economic or long-term manner. And I don't have this imperative that we should have like economic growth, that it's a problem for a country to become a banana republic in that sense, like because it's lacking economic growth. Of course, it's also, but I think this regionally dominant political economy kind of theory is more versatile. You can look at different regions, sectors, and so on, more in detail, the processes, causalities, actors, and so on. And it's very helpful to look at it in detail, like, for example, gold, and if it's like using mercury, and if it's illegal, and whatever, in detail, and what's the context, and so on, and going to different sites, places. So here is in the photo is one of the key kind of ranchers in the Amazon. He's the mayor of Itaituba, Valmer Climaco, on the right-hand side, and then some of his farm hands. So I did field work by visiting his farm, for example, and talking to him and so on. So he has 20,000 hectares and 20,000 cows, and he was saying to me he will sell now all the herd to China because the European and American buyers don't want to buy from him. That was in 2019 with the Bolsonaro fires. And here is some of here are the field research locations where I visited. So in this highway from Cuiabá to Santarém in 2019, for example, especially the Santarém region D, and then also Eastern Amazon, and then Acre and Peru. And here you see a photo of the gold mining and the expansion of deforestation since 1980s has been rapid, as been seen in satellite photos in Acre. And here you see the pesticides used. So this region in northern Mato Grosso just a few years ago, like in the 80s, still there was like a forest here, tall forest. So now it's like endless. It's kind of like shocking to see this endless monocultures. So it's a huge change also in like what exists there and in this understanding of and valuing of what can exist and is allowed to exist and for how long. So here's the soybean farmer that I visited the area with and so on. And accompanying with this is also like the establishment of meat production, which is a major problem. Here are like 20,000 chicken in each of these houses next to the soybean plantations in northern Mato Grosso. So it's kind of like repetition of this monocultural way of life and ordering life. First in the fields, only soybean and corn as a cover crop can exist, and then in these chicken factories, you can only have for a few months the chicken living, and the same repeats in the upper chain, like then fast food and slaughterhouses, very repetitive monotonous work and so on throughout the chain, logistical chain, and also the waste issue. But yes, you also have the positive side. So there are still many conservation areas, and here's a map from the book on the places studied more in detail. And a novelty that I found is that, for example, this region in Belterra, close to Santarém in Brazil, close to the Amazon River, Tapajos River, you have soybean plantations planted directly nowadays. After this is like just being burned there, and they plant soybean directly. So you don't have like rice or pasture before that. And this region of Belterra is really like a good example of this dominant political economy, because It has like 18,000 people, and it has over 100,000 hectares of soybean. It has expanded rapidly in the past years, and only 6 people own that. And one of them owns over half, and they don't even live there. Like they live in Mato Grosso. And still they control the local government, the municipality, and so on. And they plant next to schools and spread the poisons there and whatever. So it's kind of like a form of like colonialism, I would say. And you have this soybean expansion also in the state of Acre, in the west of Brazil. So 20, 30,000 hectares were there. And I traveled with the leading consultant there who explained to me, who has like himself went to the farms and explained to them, the ranchers, how to turn into soybean plantations. So there are many ranchers who even if they would get more money, they wouldn't like to turn to soybean because they like the cow business, the ranching, the cattle capitalism kind of like ranching way of life. So you have to look at that as well to explain things. And yeah, there's the firefighters, which are important. This year there was less Amazon fires because the Amazon Fund, funded especially by Norway through the Brazilian government, they hired a lot of voluntary firefighters, paying them the minimum salary and spread all across the Amazon to prevent the fires. So that was good. With the indigenous people like Munduruku, and they showing me how they stopped illegal logging and so on. So I also talk about resistance, although the main focus in this book is understanding the causes, because as Larry mentioned, I didn't really find good enough theories to explain the causes or put more focus on them. Yeah, thank you. Being used for monitoring like the Munduruku here, and that's been helpful. And here's some photos of the gold mining, how it actually looks like. Some people call it like artisanal or small scale or positive thing, but when you look at it, it's nothing like that. It's very mechanized and mafia-like. And here in the map you can see the illegal mining areas, on black, and then the gray areas where I focused for the research. And then, of course, the price of gold is even higher today than now, and it's kind of like explains a lot of things, but not alone. The price alone does not explain things. And here's there's also a discussion of this triple frontier between Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela on the book, and very interesting complex dynamics there. And then, of course, of Peru, Madre Dios, where I traveled with the Tres Islas native community up the river of Madre Dios river and explored the kind of violence there and how extractivism is changing and putting conflicts within the community, because, then there are some people within the community who say that, okay, these are like highland people, they come here, outsiders. If we don't, take out the gold, all the others will. So they also engage in extractivism. So this kind of corroding impact of this extractivism is happening within the communities when it starts to engage in that kind of thing of breaking the socio-territorial fabric of the moral economy. So here's a photo of those barges on the river and how they are sucking and this is like, for example, there could be alternative tourism here. This indigenous man, he's showing to me this lake, sacred lake, protected by a kind of anaconda, according to him, and it could be like a place for tourism, which is booming in that Madre Dios region, but people didn't even know that they have these 8 giant otters in that lake, for example, and then mining is still happening there. And then to Finland, so I stayed for 5-6 years in South Karelia, so kind of doing autoethnography in there, and when staying there, I observed in this satellite photo, you can see these clear-cut areas. So when moving in there in 2018 or so, there were still all those areas, they were not clear-cut. They're like old, over 100 years old, natural, nice forests. And when I left out, there was no tall forests left. It was just clear-cut areas. So I personally felt the, anger and frustration and sadness to see that loss. So here, for example, was a huge, nice forest. It could have been protected or conserved. The owner would have got the same money, but for ideological reasons or other, they wanted to cut it down. And by this kind of clear cutting and not continuous cover forestry, would have always also been possible. And this same area is here after 2 years. So this is in 2022, and this is 2024. So you see basically no change. So I think, it's okay to call it deforestation or forest removal, although officially it's not that by the FAO. definitions or the Finnish typical way of talking about this clear cutting. And you see the trench here, which you shouldn't really be digging, but still happens in Finland. Yeah, some other photos of how it looks like, doing loggings in the summer, which is very problematic. But there's resistance, so the new forest movement also in Finland have done occupations also in Lapland, and there's also the last 2 chapters of the book talk about the Finnish new resistance actually. And I'm thankful for the people from those movements for sharing time and talking to me about those dynamics. And this is a typical photo from the Amazon, like you see people swimming here, although there's a major forest fire for land grabbing on the other side. So it's kind of completely normalized. But then you have also indigenous people like this man here, Munduruku, like looking at the forest and showing the areas there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Markus, for such a wonderful insight into the book. And thank you also, Larry, for those comments that got us into this discussion. We do have a question in the chat. I would like to remind everybody with us that if you'd like us to read your question for you, put it in the chat. If you'd like to ask your question with your voice, please use the raise hand function. So in the chat from Miko, Markus and Larry, how do you see the future along the interoceanic highway now that the Chanquay harbor in South Peru has been modernized to cope with massive trade? And my apologies if I have mispronounced any names.
I don't know. Do you, Larry, have information on that? Do you want to say something based on what?
No, I don't have any information. I think you'd be the best person to respond to that with your knowledge of Peru.
Yeah, I don't know that particular port, but I have been observing another road project from Pucallpa to Cruzeiro do Sul in Acre. So from Pucallpa, Peru to Cruzeiro do Sul in Acre, and there what I saw is like the major impetus here is not the trade, it's speculation. So that's the westernmost municipality of Brazil is Mancio Lima, and the mayor is from there, is the biggest landowner and biggest land grabber for the Workers' Party, and he's like grabbed the lands next to that where the road would come, and the governor of the state Acre, he has a major asphalting and road building company. So they are pushing with Bolsonaro, they were pushing for this road very heavily, and the current president of Peru at that time, during Bolsonaro, Castillo said he will not build that road, but then Bolsonaro said he will build it until the border, even if the Peru doesn't build anything. But it doesn't make any sense to build those roads. There's no logical. So I don't think there would be major difference in the trade. They wouldn't still be using that interoceanic highway because maybe there's some increase, but not really for the massive trade of soybeans and so on. The river transport and so on. The other developments in Brazil are much more important, like the paving of the road between Porto Velho and Manaus that is happening now with the Workers' Party, which is highly destructive. Because now there's a new bridge also bridging Acre and Porto Velho, so it's much faster to come there and so on to expand the soybean by Rondonia people in Acre.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'd like to invite Pirjo Virtanen if she would like to ask a question.
Yeah, hello. My name is here Iriana. It's my Apurina name. I was just in a meeting with Apurina Nation. Thank you so much for this book. Congratulations, Markus. So needed to have in-depth analysis of what is happening, very complex phenomena. I would like to ask your opinion about the municipal politics, because I see in Brazil, in different states, the municipalities can have very different politics. So how do you see this to reflect in your own work and your own field work? And the other one is related to mapping illegal gold mining. So different sources are also quite different. So for this, I'm working in the Purus River region, and in municipalities of Tapawa and some others, illegal gold miners' presence is very visible. So I would like to hear your opinion on using different geospatial data sources.
Yeah, so the first question was about municipal politics or so that's very important because there's also a lot of environmental licensing happening at the municipal level and it's very important. Like in the case of Pelteha, it's kind of like captured municipality by the soybean interests. And then if you look at Itatuba, also the mayor himself, he's the biggest deforester there. And he bragged that he produces 600 kilos of gold per month and so on. And so on. So about the satellites, they are very helpful, and I have also used them. For example, tracking. You can see actually from Madre Dios, you can see the gold ravages, and the rivers. They are more like brown when you have the gold mining there. For example, in this border between Peru and Brazil, in the Cerrado Divisor National Park, where I went, you could see from the satellite that it has expanded from the gold miners had entered Brazil from the Peruvian side. And then I went actually to the local municipality of Mancio Lima, just walked in there and asked for an interview with the mayor and so on, and talked with several people from there, and then say to them that, have you looked at the satellite that there's, the gold there? We went like 5 kilometers away from it, from the border. And they said that they didn't know about that. So I think it can be highly helpful to look at from the Google satellites and other satellites, what's happening. But I didn't know that Purus River, that it has expanded. The gold is kind of like interesting because you follow the vein, so you cannot do it everywhere, And then it really depends on the local moral economies of people resisting or not engaging in that. But now with the mafia entering to different parts, it's becoming harder, especially now with the really high gold prices. So I think there will be much more of that gold expansion and conflicts.
All right, we have our next question coming from Pasi Miettinen, who will ask it with his voice.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the great work. It was really interesting to listen to this. Yes, I am Pasi Miettinen from the Forest Stewardship Council, and you may know that the roots of our organization comes from the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, 1992. And there was a principle, use it or lose it. And now when we speak about the natural tropical forests, FSC is using the natural tropical forests in a very sensitive manner. There may be harvesting of 1 or 2 or 3 big logs, but every 30 years, and the forest cover maintains all the time. There are no clear cuts, but still that is harvesting in the natural tropical forest, and we have tried to do our best that the harvesting is not damaging biological diversity. We require that the biodiversity is maintained, and also there has to be social benefits, and the indigenous people's rights are respected. And at the same time, the operation has to be economically beneficial. It is not easy equation, but still that is what we think that could be a tool for maintaining the natural forest cover. So very sensitive, cautious economic utilization could perhaps protect it from serious clear cuts or turning to agriculture or other uses. I don't know if you have thought of these things.
Yeah.
You're very welcome to comment. And also I have a question about the restoration. Have you seen examples of trying to restore?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we have actually this new project on Trees for Development with Sofia also, where we are like studying this restoration, ecological restoration. But there are attempts to plant trees, and it should happen very fast to avoid the Amazon tipping point, which is very, very close. If 20-25% of the forest is deforested, then we are there. And also the forest degradation by these selective loggings is actually based on like Philip Fernside and other leading Amazon researchers and climate scientists, it's also more problematic maybe than has been assumed on, based on science, because it increases, the heat in the forest and decreases, moisture, and then you have lions, this lianas, vines growing very fast there. There's actually tomorrow a PhD thesis by a Finnish Johan, PhD researcher at the University of Brasilia on this, like these schemes. So I think it can be observed. But yeah, I studied in the Santarem region these schemes of selective logging inside the Floresta Nacional de Tapajós, and how they were trying to be expanded also into the extractive reserve of Tapajós Arapiuns on the other side of the Tapajós River. And there were big problems there because the kind of the FSC certificate was kind of abused, so that because to export those logs you have to have the FSC certificate, but still like over 90% of the exporting of logs in Brazil, it's illegal from the Amazon. And then, when that legal operation inside the Floresta Tapajós, which was called communitarian and sustainable, they put, for example, Ipe into a pile in that sawmill where they sold the logs, then the illegal logs were also inserted into the same pile. And there were many other problems, like people coming to certify the case for 2 days in a 100,000 hectare area close to Manaus, for example. It's impossible, and like overestimating the number of trees in the beginning, and then you can take out more trees. So basically this idea of natural regeneration in 30 years does not happen, also because these trees are like 500 years old, or they are huge. And there's also conflicts with the indigenous people in that Floresta Tapajós, because they say that then they cannot hunt and move in the forest, and you cannot really build these non-wood-based forest product economies if you are engaged in logging. So I would expect that the entities like FSC wouldn't be driving further of these logging schemes in the Amazon, because I have seen this happening, like within the forest movements. There are like seminars organized by FSC where people are encouraged in extractive reserve, like rubber tappers, to cut down the trees and sell them by a certificate. And then that's a major change in the moral economy if that happens. And it kind of competes with this other focus where you would study the trees and have a socio-biodiverse economy with a standing forest with all the highly valuable resins and fruits and nuts and whatever you can have from the forest, and also the carbon issue and so on. So I don't know. Of course, we need some food. Well, I don't know but somebody might need some wood for something. So I'm not completely against that logging, but it should be based on the science on that issue. And now during the Lula government also, although official like clear-cutting deforestation has gone down rapidly in the Amazon, the degradation by selective loggings has increased. So yeah. And about this reforestation, so the problem is the high use of agrotoxics, because you need bees for pollination of fruit trees, and basically these should be agroforestry plantation, not plantations, but agroforestry biodiverse livelihood producing reforestations, and you cannot do that if you don't have bees. And in those regions where you would most need it, like in the dry region of Santarem, you really would need to have the bees, because otherwise you have to pollinate by hand. So it's kind of like non-compatible with this regionally dominant political economy of soybean, this reforestation.
Thank you so much, Pasi, for the question, and thank you, Markus, for those answers. Our next question, we have a couple that are in the chat. So this is coming from Marianne Manahan, who says, thank you, Larry and Markus, for the presentations. Very illuminating and helpful for their own PhD research in Southern Finland and their work with Indigenous peoples. They have a question about methodology. They think that it's very interesting how Markus combines regionally dominant political economies with mapping and ethnographic fieldwork. What methodological adjustments did you have to do to hold both forms of knowledge, i.e. identifying the structural drivers of deforestation and the lived relational and place-based dynamics that disrupt or exceed regionally dominant political economy logics in productive tension?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. So you have to kind of go back and forth between the theory and cases. I mean, it was a lot of, it was hundreds of pages of of interviews transcribed, and going through them, it was very challenging, especially because I lost like this size of like notes like this written like notebooks were stolen. So then I had to really, luckily I had the interviews recorded, so most of them. So, but it was a lot of work to go through the interviews, and I had a lot of great assistants like Sofia and Sana Hokkanen, who did extensive literature reviews on the political economy theories and literature. So I couldn't have done this alone, and other people really helped me a lot. So both forms of knowledge, yeah. I think, you know, it's dynamic. You have to understand that, you know, there is this structural pressure from outside, but then also people have agency, like there are differences. It's not like that you wouldn't have a choice, you know. So I think you get that when you live with the people and stay with them in the forest and talk with them, with different kind of people, not only the resistance side, or not only the, you know, the so-called productive side or the big ranchers or so on, but both sides, you know. Yeah.
All right, we have another question that's coming in from the chat. This one's from Petrozuk, and this is a question from a global perspective. Who do you think poses a greater threat to forests? Market logic, or however the policies of individual states that are thinking about strengthening their economic position by exploiting forests on their national territory? And who in these difficult times can be a political ally today in stopping deforestation processes?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really believe in this kind of thing like market logic, because when you break down the so-called market logic into these different sectors, you have different kind of transactions and, you know, different kind of like obligations, debt relations. So people are not really free. There are no such things as free markets or individual hands or stuff like that, you know. It's like fantasies, like Larry called them. And like individual states, they are very bound by these kind of like poverty issues and debt relations, and kind of powerful entities like Lula, for example, even though he would like to do something, his hands are tied to big extent now because the government is so much, or the parliament is so much in the hand of extreme right-wing, you know, anti-environmentalist politicians. So they can overturn his vetoes, so he's in a very delicate position. That said, he's still like pushing this neo-developmentalist agenda, paving the roads and increasing oil extraction and so on. So there's also that kind of dimension to his policy, which might be even more problematic than the wanton destruction and mafia-like actions of Bolsonaro, because he was incompetent in running the state. So this kind of like this kind of like using of the state money, a lot of the state money for infrastructural expansions is very problematic, because then, you know, the Workers' Party, it kind of like believes they can at the same time develop the Amazon, like build these roads, pave them, but at the same time, you know, protect part of the areas, like create this territorial organization, give some lands for protection and so on. But, you know, what I'm saying is that if you give more money and power to these regionally dominant extractivist sectors, they will take you out of the power, like happened with Dilma, to get even more power. So before the first Lula government, they were not as powerful as now, the agribusiness, and now they have become much more powerful. So it would have been impossible for the soybean sector, and this is like what insiders have said to me, to create the export air corridors from the central west of Brazil for soybean without the Lula government. So they tried that for many years to create those road access and whatever, but only with this, you know, project of economic growth back, the government allowed that. And yeah, so this is kind of like a criticism that I have made already in 2010. Yeah. And who can be a political ally? I think the most important ally, there are allies within the state. State in itself is not all bad, so it's not like an anarchist argument. There are many powerful, important actors within the state in different parties trying to do their best. There are like progressive federal prosecutors and so on in different kind of politics, institutional, electoral, judicial politics. So yeah, it depends on the case, and of course the local people.
Thank you so much. We have a very active chat today, so our next question is also coming from the chat. This is from Barry Gills, and he wants to know if you anticipate a significant increase in illegal gold mining as a consequence of the new BRICS establishing their gold-based payment settlement system.
Oh, I don't know about that, but sounds quite bad, and that might explain why China and India have been hoarding gold, and also I think other countries like Russia and so on. And yeah, that's very worrying because I mean, gold, you wouldn't really need it for anything, for like, living, so it's really sad to see that kind of destruction happening because of that metal. So yeah, I do expect with the high price of gold that there would be more problems, and especially with this, because gold kind of allows you to do this like both sides money laundering. You can launder the drug money, and it's very versatile, and you can transport it. You can lose the origin very quickly, and then it's important for the current account balance of countries. So the governments are keen to engage in that, and you can use that for many things. Like Venezuela, the government uses it for buying arms, maybe from Russia and whatever, political help and so on.
Thank you. Another question from the chat. This one comes from Anya Nugaren, and she says, many thanks for your presentation. What do you think about EUDR also stating that one of the major reasons for deforestation is coffee production? Is this relevant in Brazil concerning, for example, the Cerrado, or can it really be concerned as one of the major causes?
Yeah, there is very problematic coffee plantation expansion in Brazil, like Minas Gerais state, like traditional using a lot of pesticides, and you can produce it differently as well as cocoa. So, for example, you should engage in that kind of like cocoa production, which is called kind of like traditional way of producing cocoa, where the cocoa grows under the forest canopy in the Atlantic rainforest, and there is a project to create these agroforestry systems, like 400,000 hectares of those systems alone in southern Bahia, where you would produce, and they're already producing this very high quality chocolate in there. And I think the same could be done maybe with coffee, with agroforestry things. But then, EUDR has to be very clear in differentiating that kind of thing. And I'm a bit skeptic if they go to that direction of tracking the origin very much in detail. I was observing in this COP30 meeting these talks on the Selo Verde. This is kind of like a new tool developed by some Brazilian researchers, where they are saying they could better track the origin of beef and whatever. And they are kind of selling this to EU, and the EU is trying to then maybe buy this tool. But I don't think it will work. The Brazilians will, or those, not Brazilians, but those people engaged in those illegal trades, they will find, those corporates, they will find ways to, hide the origin and so on. So it's very dangerous when you engage in that kind of things. Of course, some certificates can be helpful. Like now, I heard that in fall in Finland, there has been a new certificate by this Silva Association for continuous cover forestry. So it's helpful if you have those kind of like different kind of production method origin certificates. So that should be the direction to go. Not like that you are like tracking, letting the illegal stuff stay there and then trying to track it. But it start from the changing the point of production, point of extraction, what happens there. And then if it doesn't help, you can think of boycotts or whatever things from the whole country, because otherwise it can be really difficult, or the region, to cover this. And then, for example, I think this EU-Mercosur talks, for example, you shouldn't agree to that trade agreement because it would increase deforestation, but also EU should ban the export of agrotoxics that are banned in EU.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Markus. I want to encourage, we have time for approximately 1 or 2 more questions. So if anybody has a question, this is definitely the time. You can either write it in the chat or use the raised hand function. Markus has just put a resource in the chat if anybody is interested to check that out. which is about logging schemes. So definitely pertinent to the topic at hand. Does anybody else want to ask a question with their voice or have me read it for them?
I could have
All right,
questions.
wonderful. Osi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't hear the beginning of the session, but my question is about more about this COP meeting. Like, were there things about this TFFF, this Tropical Forest Forever facility? Well, what did you hear about that in those?
Well, I was following all the ecological restoration, talks, and I didn't hear so much about it, but I think Larry is the leading expert here to talk more about that. So maybe Larry, he has a wonderful publication on that thing and its fallacies, and it's really problematic. I mean, like, it would only give like a small part to the local populations, and it's only speculative and so on. And well, I don't know. In the end, it doesn't have so much money like now, like $6 billion or something. Maybe Larry knows the figures better. And I mean, I wouldn't use it as a celebration of the results.
Yeah, I wasn't in Belém myself, so I can't give you the latest firsthand news about that. But the World Rainforest Movement has been following the TFFF, and also the Global Forest Coalition has been following the TFFF for quite a while, and they both have have put on their websites pretty thorough analysis of the problems with the TFFF and why it's likely not only to be useless but to be worse than useless, in that it probably will encourage deforestation rather than curbing it. So I'll try to put those. I'll put the references to the websites in the chat if I can, and yeah, I'd encourage you to look at that. I mean, the major issue with the TFFF is it's not really about forests. It's about it's an international bond investment fund designed to make profits for large Wall Street bond investors, and the idea is that a little bit of the money from that would be siphoned off and given as fairly minor prizes to tropical forest governments who could prove to the World Bank using satellite imagery that they had stopped deforestation within their borders. And I think part of the relevance of Markus's work and Markus's book to this is that Markus shows just how shallow the theory of deforestation is that the TFFF is based on. Namely, if a forest is destroyed within your borders and you're a national government, you were the one who did that, and you were the one who was going to be able to stop that. And as Markus shows, this theory of deforestation is just completely simplistic, and it's not helpful in actually addressing the issue.
Yeah, and to top that, the whole theory of what is a forest is a big problem there, because they say that the forest canopy cover of 20 to 30% is a forest. And of course, that's like in the Amazon, you have 100% cover in many places, and it's like 20, 30%. Then you can like cut the 70% from the real Amazon forest, and then you are still not like, punished for that in the TFFF, because you still have the 30% cover. So it can have like perverse impacts. And actually that they say that has been developed by these logging interests and these agribusiness interests, because they have these legal reserves that they have to have like 80% of the forest intact in the Amazon. And now there's a big push that they could cut a big part of that. And with this setting, they could cut, this 70% from that forest and still get the money. And then you could invest even the money in that fund to these deforesting sectors. So it's like in double ways, like very problematic. So I don't understand how people can celebrate it. But this touches back to the main problem of forest definition, where you also include in the official FAO definitions, for example, industrial tree plantations like monoculture eucalyptus plantations as forests. And that has made like into some very problematic analysis by forestry economists and economists, like saying that actually global deforestation would have decreased and we wouldn't have this problem. But they only can make this argument by drawing on the FAO data very uncritically, because the governments report their deforestation and forest cover data to FAO, and the FAO does not do any checking if that is correct or not. I talked with them. For example, Canada has had for several years exactly the same number of figures for what they call planted forests, as if that would have not changed at all. And so on. So you cannot rely on that data. So you really have to go on the ground and do the detailed research and not do this like broad level theorizing based on like some economistic data on statistics, which is like badly made statistics. So actually, when you look at and differentiate real forest from like natural forests and these plantations, this picture is completely different.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Markus. Unfortunately, we are out of time today for our interaction, but I brought Larry back up so we can all thank once again to our fantastic discussant and Markus as the author. I know that these are very big, broad topics that we could talk about for a very, very long time. So it's a little arbitrary the moment that we stopped, except the time has run out for us today. Thank you so much also to our whole audience. We really appreciate your time, attention, and very thought-provoking questions. I will be making a video of this, or I will be editing the video of this this evening, and hopefully I'll be able to get it up on YouTube nice and quick. I'll make sure to send it out to all the registered participants. It will also be up on the EXALT website and the Trees for Development website, and we of course encourage you to share it widely with your networks. So that's it. Thank you, everybody. The room is going to close a little bit abruptly once I close it, but it's really been a pleasure having you here with us today. So thank you, Markus. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, audience.
Thank you so much, Larry and Sophia and everybody. It's been a pleasure.